Sarwar, thank you. We have been together. We have been together several times. I deeply appreciate the collegial bond that we are developing, and I congratulate you on your OBE work. Colleagues, we have a challenging and interesting topic for this workshop. I'm going to be asking you to be very engaging with me. I have points, several different places where I would like you to ask questions, and I'm going to be asking you questions. So I hope that this can be a highly engaging dialogue and not simply a one-way presentation on my part. This workshop is going to give you a deep grounding in key OBE concepts and insights, because OBE is not like standard education. And I feel that the grounding of these key things, I hope they're not repetitious for too many of you, but a fundamental grounding is going to make the practical part of this much clearer. I'm going to give you, so here's the warning part of the program. I'm going to give you compelling examples of education's counterfeit numbers game and grading system. I really want to shift your perspective today on how we assess, how we grade, how we credential, how we keep records. And I hope to make a very compelling case that what we're doing right now is has much to be desired. Let's put it that way. Number three, I'm going to give clear explanations of what authentic outcomes and assessments are. So this is going to be positive, constructive guidance to you on doing this the way that we have been advocating and assisting people with over the last several decades. And finally, explicitly giving you advice about something we're calling criterion-defined assessments, criterion-defined record keeping, and criterion-defined credentialing. So there's a lot here for us. Not all of this is going to be conventional. You're going to be surprised a bit, but let's proceed with open minds and eager anticipation of what will unfold. Just one thing about introducing William Spady. Let's remember, I am a sociologist. And as a sociologist, I have been from the very beginning of my involvement in this with this concept, which took place 55 years ago, when I was introduced to the most formative ideas about OBE. As a sociologist, I took a very systemic organizational view of how this concept would work in the big system of education, okay? It became more and more and more practical and detailed, et cetera, as we proceeded, but I have never lost that big frame of reference, and that's what I will be sharing with you today. What I'm concerned with is a version of OBE that we've called transformational OBE. And you'll see where the break point is between conventional and transformational as I unfold these ideas. Please know I've been doing this forever, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning, I'm still growing, I'm getting ever greater insights from the work that people are doing and from the frameworks we have developed. And I constantly update my presentations and my work accordingly, and that's true for today as well. So here we go. we have verified. Okay, I have verified and we have verified. Education is caught in a time trap. That is profoundly fundamental to this workshop. Education, modern education, is caught in a time trap, and it seems to be unaware of that trap. Number two, credentialing controls everything. Everything we do in education is so that somebody gets credit for something. And getting credit becomes more important very often than the learning itself. But how we organize courses, how we do assessment, okay, the teaching practices we convey, it's all about, okay, this giant mega system called credentialing. The bad news is that credentials are counterfeit. And I'm going to make a special point of showing you how, why they're counterfeit, and what we can do about it. Okay? I'm not going to say we have to stop credentialing, although if we did, we might be better off. Okay? But the system we have now is not a sound and solid system, and together today we'll build one. The issues that I'll be addressing, and these three issues themselves are paradigmatic. That is, they involve a whole belief system, cultural system, way of operating, way of structuring the system that is beyond, that transcends the classroom and the lecture hall. So please know, when OBE began, it began with a classroom focus. And because it began with a classroom focus, okay, it missed these other three powerful factors. So I'm going to start with this big paradigmatic picture. Whoa, look at this. The credentialing system's components are made up of how we assess and the criteria we use, which are dependent on the substance we're teaching and the outcomes we have. Okay, included in all of that are the standard systems and grading that we do, which lead to transcripts and diplomas for students. And it's all governed by how we structure and use time and opportunity. So this is a very complex system, endless moving parts and factors. And I'm going to try to sort some of the key ones out for you and work with you to build, we say in the States, build a better mousetrap, okay? Build a better way of doing this that is really more consistent with the outcome-based work that, that we've been bringing to the world for these last several decades. So part one, a deep grounding in key OBE concepts and insights, okay? And notice the subtitle I've given this. So this is a new and weird word, from educentrism to success. Educentrism is a word I made up, okay? You won't find it in the dictionary. It has to do with the closed system way that modern education works. That system is not outcome-based, okay? We want to shift that system from being educentric to a system of success that really promotes success for students and for faculty and for the system as a whole. So in 1967, way back then, I was introduced to the work of Benjamin Bloom, whose ideas, not his taxonomies, but his ideas was about changing the system so there would be more learning success. And these were the sociological insights that I had immediately when I heard about the work and tried to put it into a frame of reference. Number one, everything in education is defined by and operates within fixed time blocks. They can be very short time blocks, like class periods, and they can be very huge time blocks, like entire diploma programs and professional training programs. Multi-year time blocks down to minutes time blocks. All of them, okay? It operates around time blocks. Credentialing controls everything, not just drives instruction. It controls instruction, it drives instruction because the curriculum is organized in order to give people credits, okay? And the curriculum is organized around the time blocks and the credits. Third, I understood that opportunity for students, an opportunity to be called a successful student, ends when the time blocks end, okay? And when students get graded in those time blocks in ink for credit. So when the time blocks end, the big ones, the larger ones we call terms, ones we call semesters, ones we call school years, ones we call courses, when those time blocks end, students get graded in ink permanently, goes on their permanent record for whatever they've done during the time block. That's what they get credit for. It doesn't matter if they've learned more about it later. It doesn't matter if they've improved later, okay? Everything is focused on what happens in the time block. And from an outcome-based point of view, that has to change. So, education, it turns out, right now, our current system is a fixed time, limited opportunity system. Fixed time, limited opportunity, and I'll add vague and variable standards that's fundamentally organized. It may not intend that, okay? We may think it doesn't, but it is organized to label and sort and manage students. Who are the good achievers from the poor achievers? Who are the fast learners from the slow learners? Okay, and manage them accordingly with different programs and different subsequent opportunities. So, my realization, education is time-based. Education is curriculum-based. Okay? Education is credentialing-based. Education is accreditation-based. Education is inertia-based. And all of that gives us this gigantic thing we call educentrism. Okay? It's all one giant closed system from a sociological point of view. Our job as educators, Benjamin Bloom's job in 1967, and my job ever since, has been to open up the walls, okay, and tear down the barriers within that educentric system. It's a closed system. And the closed system shapes how we think about how education is. Okay, we just take for granted how it is and what it could be, because what it could be has to fit inside of how it is. That's what creates a closed system. It's self-reinforcing. Its defining elements are unique to it. Modern life does not have semesters. Modern life does not have credit hours. Okay, all of these things we take for granted and become part of our common vocabulary is unique to the educentric system. Okay, educentrism has something I call a CBO syndrome. And that CBO syndrome, it embodies, it simply reflects, okay, the practices and beliefs and cultural norms and regulations, etc., all of that, that have been entrenched for generations now, generations in the educentric system. Consequently, there is literally no one who is well educated today who has not been well educated in the educentric system, because the creators of the educentric system have died long ago. We simply are operating in a system they created and formalized in the 19th century. Educentrism loves the status quo. That's why it's inertia-based, okay? The most common phrase we would hear when we were introducing OBE in the early days was, well, we've never done this before. Of course you haven't. You've only done educentrism before. And educentrism isn't outcome-based. So, in that paradigm, everything runs on predetermined schedules. Courses are predetermined schedules, okay? Those schedules are defined by the clock. Those schedules are defined by the calendar. It's why education is an absolutely, totally time-driven system, okay? Linear time. In the educentric system, okay, this wasn't the case, okay, always in education, but in the educentric system, about the only thing that seems to matter now is cognitive ability. How smart are you? How quick are you with your brain? And all the other aspects of learning and performance and human talent are basically pushed aside. They're called frills in the States. They're called unimportant. Oh, we'll do that in the extracurriculum activities, because the real thing is all about cognitive. It is a very narrow perspective of what learning is. Therefore, the word applied has died, because so much of what was education had to do with applied skills and abilities, and cognitive has driven it out. Every university student we have will get 16 years of educentrism. We'll get 16 years of educentric education until we change something. So this workshop is focused on the heart of that change, the driving forces in that change, and I truly hope that you find it beneficial to play with these ideas with me. Now, here's the CBO syndrome, and I'm going to show you the CBO syndrome for two key reasons. Number one, when we talk about OBE, almost everybody out there in the world is doing CBO. and you're going to see the CBOs, not all of them, but you're going to see them. This has been my universal experience. When people start with OBE, they do CBO. One is compliance-based organizations. Well, orientation, sorry. We have to do what the regulations and the laws say. The regulations and the laws are all time-based educentric, okay? Which means that students are going to get calendar-based opportunities, not multiple opportunities, not expanded opportunities, which is one of OBE's experiences. Everything is defined by how the calendar dates fall and when we give credit. People write outcomes about the curriculum they already have. That's understandable, except outcome-based means that we need to figure out what are those critical things we ultimately want the students to learn and base the curriculum on that rather than basing the outcomes, writing outcomes for what we're already teaching. In a smaller version, the objectives, which is really what most people focus on rather than the big outcomes, they're all content bound, okay? In other words, they come from the curriculum that we're doing because we're giving people cognitive instruction. It's a cellular-based organization because we divide classrooms, lecture halls, grade levels, curriculum areas, program, everything is divided into its own cells and cubicles. Okay, this is all done. The reason, oh, by the way, the reason it's time-based is because that's convenient. Okay, all we have to do is wait for the clock, the calendar, or the schedule to kind of tell us the next thing to do, and it doesn't create any confusion. Okay, it's all convention. That means it's based on how we're used to doing things, which is profoundly obsolete because all of this was modeled, certainly in our country, was all modeled on how modern factories were supposed to work, which is with assembly lines. Well, education is its own version of an assembly line. And here's my favorite, okay? And I have to say this, okay, with no offense to anyone, but in the States, the most asked question by students is not, what are we going to learn? It's, does this count? And does this count means, is this going to be on the test? And is the test grade going to be in my record? And is that going to affect my credit? Everything is about getting credit, which is why we're dealing with credentialing today. What are the grounding elements of educentrism? Very simple. It's driven by comparison. How are we doing, you doing, me doing, better than or worse than other people? It's a competitive system. It's a system filled with requirements that demand compliance, okay? It is inertia-based. Everything just keeps going on conventionally the way we do it, and that's how we credential. So these 5 C's, which are not the 5 C's that I've been advocating in my work in the last couple of decades, okay? These 5 C's are what ground and drive the educentric system. So if there are any questions up to this point, I'd like to entertain them. This is simply setting the stage for what's coming here now in the rest of the workshop.
I don't foresee any questions over here. So I think we can go forward But I have one question that is,
Yes, I was
in-
going to ask you, do you do you have a question?
yeah, that is, I found a statement there that the word applied has died. I did not get the full meaning of that. Why you have saying
Oh,
that?
well, that was a clever verbal twist, okay?
Okay.
Applied is programs and courses that teach real skills and competence,
Mhm.
okay? I mean, and there used to be a whole host of those things. And they have gradually, when cognitive became the dominating factor,
Mhm.
okay, we had those courses. Anything that was called applied was for students who weren't smart enough to do the academic work. So
Yes.
we have had in this is absolutely traditional in European systems, okay? And most other countries that were at one time colonized by European countries, all right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
therefore inherited their model of education.
Yes.
In those, yes, so this has happened all over the world, okay? Regardless of of the country, somewhere around age 11, there would be some kind of big giant examination that would sort out the smart from the dumb, okay? Who would smart, the intellectual smart kids from the kids who can't do that. It was all sorted out by these exams. So the kids who were dumb, okay, who had applied skills were sent to training programs that would develop those applied skills, but basically they wouldn't be doing anywhere near, they wouldn't be allowed in the courses, et cetera, that the elite kids could. So that
Okay.
was true over and over and over everywhere. In the United States, we didn't do it that way. We just kept dragging this system out more and more and sort of informally segregating the two kinds of abilities, or three, rather than it being done by a formal examination system. So that's why apply died. Apply died as a legitimate, wonderful thing to do in educentric education, okay? But it's certainly, as you'll see, in OBE, applied is the heart of what learning should be about.
Got that. But
Long explanation.
yes, and it will be very difficult for a common teacher to get the full inner meaning of it. Yeah.
Well, I have the advantage of being very old. And being very old, I was taught by professors who were also very old. And those professors understood some of these historical things,
Yes.
okay, about how all of this got started. And it's still prevalent. They're still doing it. This is not new news. This is just a reminder of how the system really is. Okay? And to me, it's very important for teachers and faculty to understand this. Their
Yeah.
courses, their teaching practices, what they do does not exist in a vacuum. Okay?
Mhm.
It is very much defined by and controlled by this edu-centric inertia, these edu-centric structures.
Yes.
Somebody decided that education should be time-based.
Mm.
Okay, but today, anyone with a computer at home can learn a tremendous amount of things
Yes.
on no defined schedule.
Yes. We have I think in your support, I would like to cite two examples if you allow.
Sure. Oh,
One is like Nobel laureates, Nobel Prize. It
hmm,
is not time bound. Which stage, at which age one will get a Nobel Prize. It is not time bound. Is this success? And another success is like the bigger companies like Microsoft and Google. Those we call them, all of them are dropout students from good universities, but they became the leader of the
that's right.
yeah.
We have a very clever saying over here in the States. Okay. All of your A students will be working for all of your C students in a decade. Okay. The ones who got A's, see, the brainy people who kept getting degrees will end up working for the C students who are
Yeah.
much more creative and entrepreneurial.
Okay.
And it's the C students who create the businesses and the opportunities, and the A students go to work for them.
Yes, it's very true.
Okay.
Very true.
So all we've tried to do, Professor, is tell that story. Okay. Tell that story. It'll be clearer as I go. Let me continue.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah. Let's go.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
So in 1968, now this is for teachers, this and professors. Okay, absolutely. Benjamin Bloom wanted to expand learning results in schools. Okay, but he overlooked, because he was a psychologist, he overlooked all these systemic factors that go along with this instructional model he called mastery learning. Mastery learning was basically how I learned about the fundamental ideas that we now call, and we started calling them pretty early, OBE. Okay. Mastery learning challenged educentrism's fixed time, single opportunity structure and operations. That is, it taught teachers and encouraged teachers not to be time bound, not to give students only one chance to do whatever it was, but to offer expanded opportunities, more coaching, more assistance, etc. It improved classroom instruction because there was a method and a sequence and a process that teachers could follow. And most of them weren't following it. Okay, they were simply teaching the way they had been taught. Okay, so it definitely improved instruction. It worked within the existing curriculum. It did not try to change the curriculum. Okay, the outcomes did not proceed the curriculum. The outcomes, i.e., the objectives that teachers had for students, the objectives came from the curriculum. Therefore, it was still CBO in important respects. But it had a success for all learners philosophy. And that is what OBE has embraced, okay, is that philosophy and the multiple opportunity factor that was in mastery learning. And mastery learning challenged education selection bias. It wasn't about finding out who's the smart kids and finding out who's the slow kids. It was basically working within given classrooms, whoever was there, and making it work for everyone. So Bloom had a double paradigm shift in his mind. I made it explicit, but in his general mind and approach, he needed to shift two things. One was time. He had to move thinking about time and the operationalization of time. That is how teachers work with time, from being fixed time, single opportunities, and using time as a definer of opportunity. He had to move from that educentric approach to using time flexibly, giving kids multiple opportunities, which generally meant more than one, and using time as a resource. Okay. In fact, Bloom explicitly used the words alterable resource regarding that. So that paradigm had to shift. The other one was learning standards. Learning standards had to shift, okay? From vague and variable, and comp means comparative and competitive standards, okay? Let's just see who can be the best here, okay? At whatever it is the teacher makes up, to clear and known and criterion defined standards, okay? Outcome-based education's number one principle was called clarity of focus on outcomes. Well, clarity was to make the outcome, the desired intended result, clear to the students before you even started. Okay, before you started, so they had a goal and they knew what they would be able to do before they even started. So Bloom said this double paradigm shift was basically built into the mastery learning model. So the model embodied a well-sequenced curriculum, criterion-defined objectives, because it was simply small pieces of learning as we move along. It was not the big picture stuff. No bell curve or comparative grading. Okay, the bell curve was gone. Who's doing better than somebody else was gone. It was how well can you do this clearly defined performance, this clearly defined objective. Therefore, it had clear and higher expectations for students, because we were basically saying in OBE, students who are slow learners can learn the same things that the fast learners can learn. They're just not going to learn it on the same day, but they can learn it. And lo and behold, teachers discovered that was true. Okay, I'll give an example about that in just a minute. Teachers should verify that students have the prerequisite abilities to learn the next thing in the curriculum. If they don't have the prerequisites, they're going to be lost. They're going to be confused. It's going to take even longer to learn the next thing. If you give them the prerequisites, they can learn the next thing faster. And the mastery people who were testing and building the model, they realized and they documented, oh my goodness, that is true. Now, here's the key. This brings us precisely to today's topic. Aligned, which means directly matched to those objectives you see up there, an aligned formative assessment. Now, formative simply meant this is a trial. This is to see how well the students can do. It's not to label them. It's not to grade them. It's not to give them. It's to see how are we doing here and what needs to be done to make it better. So what needs to be done to make it better was targeted assistance based on the things in the formative assessment where the students weren't doing well. It was not a general grade. Okay, telling the students, well, you got 80% doesn't tell the students, well, then what do I do if I want 100? Okay, it just says, well, you got 80. So this was about being targeted with the assistance, and the final thing, giving students at least, not only, at least a second chance, at least a second opportunity to do better on that particular module of learning. So that was the mastery model. And out of the mastery model came our thinking that led to the fundamental defining elements of OBE. Now, there was a great assessment divide. There was a divide between the people who only did and only thought about what Bloom called summative assessment, which is great, which is final assessments for final grading. They're permanent, they go in the record, etc. Formative assessment was to do the things in the mastery model. Criterion defined, it was substantive, it was not with numbers and scores. It was diagnostic, okay? How are they doing and what do we do about that? And it was provisional, okay? This is where the whole idea you see there on the bottom line here of it focused on supportive feedback and pencil grading. And I can remember going into a workshop with teachers that had been working with OBE for quite some time and walking into the auditorium, and there were all these teachers there, and they were all going like this. And the superintendent of schools who introduced me, he said, they're all waving pencils because they've learned, okay? Preliminary grading, diagnostic, okay? Don't grade in ink, grade in pencil, which means there's still an opportunity to improve. All of that we had to teach people, and all of that got introduced in their work. So what mastery learning and OBE did, because remember, we were literally a combination for almost 2 decades, we challenged educentrism's summative orientation, which was final, it was numeric, it was symbolic, it was comparative, it was competitive, it was time-based. We said, no, there's another way of doing it. Now, what summative assessment does, it aligns with accountability. It aligns with cumulative cognitive learning. We add up an average how the students have been doing. If you started slow, etc., you'll never catch up in a comparative grading system and an averaging system because you can't escape your mistakes, which we'll see in a little while. Okay, so these are the characteristics. The great divide, the assessment divide, is between a summative system that says this is permanent, this is final, this is time-based, versus a formative system that encourages keep improving, keep improving, keep improving. Now, out of all that work, out of all of that mastery work that Bloom was doing and all of the work that we were helping people do mastery in classrooms, etc., out of that came our 3, OBE's 3, I call them pro-success premises. All students can learn and succeed. Okay, yes, they can, but not on the same day. They're not all going to get there on the same day and not in the same way, which means that they have different learning styles, learning approaches. Some are much better with their hands. Some people are oral learners. Some people are visual learners. The students learn differently. So if you want them to be successful, you need to be able to teach in a variety of ways, not the standard lecture presentation way that so many of us had to learn at university. Second, learning success fosters more success. So start early, okay? Start creating successful learning experiences when students are young or early in a course, etc., and build from there. Build from there. Keep people on the success path. Number 3, schools control the conditions of success. That's why I got into OBE, because the system was controlling the conditions of success, and they were limiting, constraining conditions. Those conditions had to expand if we were going to expand, okay, our success with learners. It wasn't just the teachers have to teach better. The teachers are in a system that undermines successful teaching in many respects. So expanding the conditions of success was critical. So I can be very clear about this as I sequence this in. Therefore, OBE, I'm not talking about mastery learning now, but OBE was developed to transform and eliminate educentrism. Okay, OBE is non-educentric. Okay, number 2, OBE existed to expand the conditions of success. Now, I'm only going to go that far and tell a story. In 1980, Benjamin Bloom and I were on the stage as the featured speakers at a big national conference. And we were being interviewed. It was sort of a dialogue back and forth. Okay? And the dialogue went on for a while, and Bloom stopped. And this is exactly what he said. He said, "Spady, you're trying to change education. I'm just trying to help teachers." And I said back to him in a kind of uncomplimentary way, "I'm sorry. Yes, Ben, you are. And you've got 2 million to go, which means there's 2 million teachers out there, and you're sort of trying to help them one at a time get better. If we don't deal with the big systemic stuff, that'll never happen." Now, here's the big shift. To empower, OBE exists not to teach the curriculum, etc., so you pass the tests. It's to empower the learners to be able to do successful things in school and beyond. And I'll make very clear how that unfolded, so that those students could help ultimately elevate the human condition, make life better, okay, for themselves and the world. Otherwise, why are we doing this if we're not making life in the world better? Questions so far? Anything in that segment?
Oh, not in from the audience side.
Okay.
But one thing is that if the more we try to put the so-called our OB concept into our time boxed frame, it is actually a conflicting exercise. It is a conflicting exercise with implementing OBE, because OBE, that the transformational OBE that you are talking about, it cannot be time-based. So our regular practice, it goes totally, it's an opposite direction. So if we
correct,
yeah,
keep going. Yes. So
this is a completely revolutionary concept to define the whole education system, whilst where there will be schools there will be learning, but it will not be the like time-based thing, but there will be a flow of giving and taking the knowledge and the practices. So it will become like more individual oriented, not for a like flock of a sheep and flock of a student. So the rhythm and the taking of the knowledge, the speed will be, maybe some waves are very large, some waves are small, but the small waves will become large again at one time. So something that will happen, it may we may find that someone is completing the schooling only in 6 years, someone is taking 12 years, someone is taking 10 years. Something like that you are expecting in future?
That may happen, but let me tell you a true life story about that very point. Okay. My daughter, who is a brilliant woman, okay, when she was in university, she came to me in tears, crying, "Dad, I'm not going to pass chemistry." And she wanted to pass chemistry because unless she passed chemistry, she could not become a veterinarian, that is a animal doctor. She
Yes.
was fabulous at working with animals, okay? She wanted to be a veterinarian because she had to get into a medical program for animals, all right? She said, "I can't pass chemistry the way they teach chemistry." And I said, "Well, sweetie, I am very sorry. What can I tell you?" She said, "Well, why isn't chemistry, okay, 3 different things? Okay, why isn't there a 7-month chemistry course for all the really smart guys who can learn it in 7 months, a 9-month course, okay, which is how they do it now, and an 11-month course? Because I can learn it in 11 months, but I can't learn it in 9.
Okay.
And some of the people who are learning it in 9 could actually learn it in 7. So the question is, are we, my dear friend, are we teaching chemistry or are we teaching courses? And we're teaching courses which are locked into time systems. So my daughter absolutely had the right idea. One of my colleagues, who was the principal of an elementary school, okay, a kindergarten through grade 6, okay, no higher. He decided to do OBE, quote, the right way. Okay, now remember, this is just math. This is not other things, okay? He took every math book and everything he could find and started reorganizing them, cutting it up into sections, etc., and asking the question, what do students need to know absolutely in order to do this segment correctly? In other words, the prerequisites that were in the mastery model. Okay, what are the prerequisites for this? Well, what are the prerequisites for that? And he ended up developing a very complex map that was not like any of the books, because the books assumed that the students would have to go through book 1 and then book 2 and then book 3, and he was showing this map. At the end of grade 6, he had students mastering Algebra 1 because of how efficient this was. Every student in the school was, by 6th grade, okay, achieving on standardized tests at the 8th grade level. Wow. Every one of them, okay? Yeah. Because he organized the curriculum, the learning, the time schedule, etc., better, and differently. Now,
Yes.
that can be done. That's called the conditions of success. Okay?
I got
We
it.
have to use our imaginations, and we have to step outside the box in order to do that. Okay? So let me move forward. I still have a lot of interesting things going here. Thank you. Thank you. I hope that helped. Part 2. Oh, we better get going. Okay. Here are compelling examples of education's counterfeit numbers game. Okay. These are going to be distortions that the numbers game creates. By doing numbers the way we do numbers, okay, we're not doing learning, and we're totally misrepresenting student achievement. Here goes. Here is a very unpleasant truth. Education, now this is from an outcome-based point of view, carries out a bogus practice of sorting and ranking students instead of developing and validating their learning, their innate gifts, and their identities. Now, learning, innate gifts, and identities is what I was discussing in the previous workshop, okay, when we were talking about taking a deep dive into, quote, learner potential. So it sorts and ranks students basically on a time basis of how fast a learner are you. And if you're a fast learner, you win. And if you're a slow learner, you lose. The practice, what's used to do that, is the numbers game. It's how we attribute numbers to learning. Here we go, invent the numbers. We adults, we educators, make up the numbers. And I'll be showing you that. And we'll play some games doing that in a minute. The numbers game is easy. It's routine. The problem is it's seriously biased and misleading, and it's not outcome-based. Outcome-based is substance-based, not numbers-based. And unfortunately, mastery learning got caught in the numbers game, which is why there was eventually, after 20 years, a separation of the two. Okay, so here's the numbers game. Here we go. It has been formalized, institutionalized, legalized, and internalized. Okay, internalized in our brains by education systems everywhere, even though it doesn't do these things. It doesn't assess real outcomes. It doesn't grade real essentials. It doesn't document real learning, and it doesn't credential real competence. Otherwise, it's wonderful. It's easy. It's convenient, and it's counterfeit. It's contrived. Okay? The numbers game, and therefore the credit game, is contrived. We make it up. It's artificial. It's counterfeit. We pretend. We pretend, the whole system pretends, that everything is worth 100 points. And therefore, we assign points, that is, we in education, assign the same 100 points to totally dissimilar kinds of learning. It doesn't matter what the subject area is. It doesn't matter what the skill is. It doesn't matter what the concept is. It doesn't matter what the program. Everybody's working with this thing called 100 points. So we pretend that the 100 points is sort of equal to everybody else's 100 points because that's equal to 100 points because it's all a fiction. But we're pretending that it's all valid and wonderful. We then average all of these totally dissimilar unequal points, and we compound that original distortion and generate a GPA, a grade point average for the students, on which we then rank the students. So we're ranking the students on a distorted fiction of a distorted fiction of a distorted fiction. And you get into university and you get scholarships and you get fellowships and everything else on the distorted fiction. Now, it's not that some of those students with all these high GPAs, it's not that they haven't learned a lot, and it's not that they're not smart and qualified. It's that the entire system can't tell you what they can do. It can only list the name of the courses and the kinds of credit they got. Okay? A course named this, a course named that. And our solution, okay, another life experience, when we were trying to bring, okay, the when we were trying to bring OBE to the public schools in the state of Arizona, okay, the chairman of their board of education in the state, the governing board of education, understood what I was talking about. But the state superintendent was had been a math teacher. Okay, and I remember this distinctly. Okay, he said the mathematics learning in this state needs to improve. And she said, oh, we'll give the kids another year of math as a requirement. Well, that wasn't making people better math learners. It was putting people back through the same thing that wasn't working. The same thing that wasn't working. So here we go. Scoring, grading, assessment, averaging, and record keeping are not the same things. They're all there. Now, we make them all just about the same thing in the numbers game, but they are absolutely different processes and things that we can make decisions about how we approach them and handling them. They appear to make the learning seem equivalent when it isn't. That is, just turn it into numbers, then it's equivalent. They create the illusion of 100, which I mentioned. And, okay, this is my favorite. Averaging leads to permanent records because we add up and average everything that's been in ink. We have a permanent record of all the students' past mistakes. Okay, because when they started learning something, they couldn't do it as well as when they end up. Consequently, we keep averaging your mistakes in with your improvements. And therefore, we never ultimately see the improvement. We see the accumulation of all the things, including the mistakes and the improvements. Now, I wrote a book in 2001. It's called Beyond Counterfeit Reforms. And I was just furious at the way this whole testing and everything was going in the United States, and that it was called reform. And it was absolutely counterfeit. And I wrote a chapter in that book, okay, with an example that here's a student who starts the year with 100%. Okay, he's got a good, strong background, et cetera, and he gets 100%. And here's a student who starts and this is new, and he gets 50%. Okay, Well, the teachers help this kid and help him and help him and help him. In the meantime, this guy keeps getting 100%. Okay, 100%. Pretty soon at the end of the semester, this kid is at a much higher level, okay, than when he started, but we're going to average all his grades. So his average grade is really there. It's not there, it's there. Now, he's continuing to improve from there, and by the end of the year, both of these kids get 100. Now, this kid up here, his score is 100. This kid who started at 50, his score is 75. And then my question always to audiences, who learned the most? He learned the most. He already knew a lot of the stuff and kept getting hundreds. And this kid learned the most and got the lowest grade. Okay, that's what you can do with the numbers game. Now there's more, but any questions yet?
No more questions here. And
All right, see you shaking your head, yes, up and down, okay?
no, because I was thinking like, you see, for scientists, if they fail, or an entrepreneur, if they fail, they call that event a learning event. Through failing, they call that learning.
Absolutely. It didn't work. So
Yes.
let's see what does work.
Yeah,
Exactly. It doesn't mean, well, it didn't work, so we're going to send you to jail or anything like that. It didn't work.
yes.
Now, what we want to build in students is the resiliency that when they don't do well, they'll come back and keep trying and bring it up to where they want it to be. That's the point of this. It's to build that very resiliency. Keep trying, keep getting better. Okay, let me continue, please. So here's Spady's law of averaging. Now, I basically explained one of the dreadful ways that can happen, but here are my laws of averaging, okay? You might want to take notes. Never make mistakes, ever, because they will always be held against you in an averaging system. You can't escape your mistakes. They're always going to be dragged along and averaged with everything else you do, including all of the good stuff and the wonderful achievements. Number two, God forgives. GPAs don't. GPAs are in ink. You will be ranked based on your imperfections, because the only people who are at the top of the ranking are people who are perfect at doing the numbers game. Now, here's the first little exercise. For averaging to be valid, because I mean, we average everything that moves, okay? That's another Americanism, okay? We average everything that moves. For averaging to be valid, the points themselves must have equal value, okay? You can't have giant points and little points. You simply have 90 and you have 1, and they're equivalent in their point value, okay? 90 is simply 90 of 1 points, okay? But the points are not all equal, okay? Spady's law here. The points aren't all equal. So here's a question. You get to figure this out. I'm just going to give you a second to do it. On a scale of 1 to 100, oh, here we are with 100. What is the most unequal point difference on the scale? These aren't equal points somewhere. What is that unequal point? Where is it unequal? Where is it absolutely not equal? So the points aren't all equal. Try to figure that out. Okay, here we go. Consider this. To students, the point between pass and fail is about 1,000,000 points wide. It's not 1 point wide. That gap, okay, that 1 point gap to them is 1,000,000 points wide. Okay, because it's the point between pass and fail. Now, somebody with a brilliant mind decided the following, okay, that in the United States, that point difference is between 69 and 70. In the Philippines, it's between 74 and 75. Okay. In mastery learning, it was between 79 and 80. Okay. When I got to South Africa, I found out that they were using the British system and it was really 49 to 50. Okay. And it's just absolutely clear. We're making it up. There is no point of pass and failure because it just depends what country you go to, what institution you go to, etc. All right. So forgive me, it's all a fiction. But we've been doing it for so long, we believe it has credibility and merit. And just to be scientific and precise, we compute GPAs to the third decimal point just to make the ranking more precise. And the GPA is made up of who knows what. The GPA is the accumulated average of all the mistakes you've ever made during university or during high school. Okay, because you can't get rid of them. The only GPA that is wonderful is the one where nobody has made any mistakes. So there's nothing that's going to get averaged. Now, that raises just enormous moral issues for me, etc. But I'll give you one more. Worst of all, if they only give you this much space to record a student's learning, they don't want to know much. They don't want to know about the learning. They want to know the number. What number did you put in there? As if the number was the learning. So from an OBE perspective, the numbers game cannot separate essential learning from all of the other stuff that gets assessed. Now, I'm going to drive home a point here. Please forgive me. Essential means essential. What is absolutely essential to learn, to know about, to be able to do in whatever it is you're teaching? What is essential? If it's not there, then it's incomplete. It's not there. So something's missing. What is essential? Okay, that's the issue here. The numbers game assessments don't measure essential learning at all. They can't tell you what's essential, what's not essential, etc. And we're going to do a little thing here, which all classrooms everywhere in the world do, okay, all the time, and that is we're going to take a test. We're going to take a 10-item test. Now, in the United States, okay, every Friday is test day, and all the kids in whatever class it is end up getting either a 10-item or a 20-item test. Now, if it's a 10-item test, okay, then every item gets 10 points. And if it's a 20-item test, then every item gets 5 points, because everything has to add up to 100. Okay, so how many points are we going to give for our 10-item test? We're going to give 10. Now, what are we assuming about content? Okay, here's my answer. We're assuming that all knowledge is divided into 10 equal configurations of something, whatever it is, because we've got 10 items. So all items, all knowledge seems to come either in 10s or in 20s, because that's how we test. So we're testing an awful lot of 10 and 20 item knowledge, except that we don't know if some of those things are more important, less important, irrelevant, distractors, which they put into, we don't know. But we're assuming there's 10 of everything. Now, let's do mastery learning. What should our passing score be if we're going to take this test? If we're going to pass the test, what should we do? Now, in the States, it would have been 70 points, okay, but mastery learning said we're going to have higher expectations. We're going to have 80 to pass. Let's accept 80. This is not a trick. This is not a trick, okay? So our passing score is 80. Okay, now we can answer these questions. Which essential items must we get right? If this is a 10-item test of essential knowledge, if that's why we're testing, which items must we get right? That's the first question. And which items can we miss and still pass? Because our passing score is 80. So here we go, really fast. Take the test with me. Okay, this is not a trick. Here goes. In order to pass, must we get the first item right? The answer is no. We can get the first item wrong, lose 10 points, and we'll still pass. Okay. Must we get the second item right? Well, the answer is no. We'll lose 10 points, but we still pass because we get 80. Now, here's where things get interesting. Must we get the third item right? Now, I have done this with an audience as large as 600 people. And you should see the chaos that breaks out in the room, okay, when we get to question number 3. And all kinds of people and arguments and everything happen. Must they get the third item right? Okay, so I'll make it simple. The answer is no. but it all depends. It depends on how they did on the first two items. If they didn't get those right, they have to get this one right. But it all depends. So what about the fourth item? Do they have to get it right? Well, the answer is no, but it all depends on how they did on the first three items, and then maybe they do and maybe they don't. So usually when I'm about this far into it, the audience is they're starting to get what the picture is here. All right. So when we say, well, what about the fifth item? And what about the sixth item? And okay, well, then they start to see, no, but it all depends on how they do on the previous items. So when we get to the 10th item, it all depends on how they've done on the previous 9. So here's the conclusion. Here's the conclusion. I know it looks like a trick and it's a game of logic and all that stuff. That's not it. Major conclusions. No item is essential. Hence, there is no essential knowledge in the test because you can miss any item and still pass. This is not a trick. You can make any item and pass. Number 2, and this is my favorite bullet of all time. The only essential thing is to get enough non-essential items right so that you pass. Because no item is essential. Okay, now, wait, there's more. Here's what's true. Anytime you set a pass-fail standard below 100, you are declaring all the items in the test to be non-essential. If they don't have to get 100, if they don't get them all right, then you're saying any item that you get wrong is okay. And if any item is okay, there's nothing essential in the test. Now, this gets worse because then I've said, therefore, every test ever given in every school classroom in the history of mankind has been a test of non-essential stuff. Because you don't have to get 100 to pass the test. So it's all part of this totally fictitious, bogus numbers game. Now, I've got several more things I want to share here, so
You go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead.
I can go ahead.
Yes, please.
Did that make sense, Sarwar? Did you understand?
Yes, it is completely aligned with my thoughts, which I was thinking long ago, that the essential thing you are mentioning. Yeah, this is very important.
Essential means essential. Okay, let me give an example really fast,
Yes.
really fast. We had been working with a school district. This was a high school district, and they had 4 or 5 big high schools in Arizona.
Hmm.
And we've been their superintendent was very much into OBE. And one day I was visiting the district, and the director of assessment came running up to me. And he said, "We have done it. We have done it." And I said, what did you do? He said, "We have created the perfect demonstration, okay, assessment for graduating seniors. Now, we were calling those things exit outcomes. So in order to exit the system and graduate, these are the, he said, we have a perfect thing for every grade 12 student. I said, okay. He said, yes, they are going to do a research project, okay, and write that research project up, and it is going to be publishable. It's got to be so well done, it's publishable in a professional journal. And I thought, oh my God, what? Okay. So, and so before I could say, oh, that's pretty unreasonable, he said, and it has 16 components. I said, okay. And he said, here they are. And he starts telling me the thing that if you've ever had to do a doctoral dissertation, those are the things you have to do for a doctoral dissertation, except he's saying that all the grade 12 students have to do this. So they have to define a problem, and they have to develop hypotheses, and they have to, and every one of those things has to be there, and it has to be professional, and they have to analyze the data, and it has to be all written up, all this stuff. He said there are 16 things, and then he said, and we're going to give each one 6 points. And I said, okay. So let's pretend they've done all this stuff. But half of the words in this paper are misspelled. 6 points off. Oh, no, that would be terrible, he says. Okay, we couldn't publish that paper. And I said, I know, it wouldn't be publishable. I said, but don't worry about the spelling, okay? Let's just pretend that the data in the tables is wrong. 6 points off. Oh my gosh, no, that's not publishable. We can't do that. I said, I know. So I think what you're telling me is that you have 16 criteria that are essential. Therefore, every one of those criteria is worth 100 points. Because if you can't do it, it's not publishable. And he just went, oh. And the last I ever saw him, he was wandering down the hall in total, because they had created the perfect assessment for the perfect thing, etc. If it's essential, folks, it's worth 100 points. And don't do the points either. So here's the grim reality.
But Prof, we have 30 minutes only, so
Yep.
Are you
Here we
okay
go.
with 30
Yep.
minutes? Yeah.
Here we go. Here's the grim reality. It's entrenched. Points and scores have become universally accepted. We accept the proxies. We accept the substitutes. We accept, okay, the substitutes. What about the real stuff? Once we make them up, points become our outcomes and our paradigm reality. Stop doing points. Oh no, can there be more bad news? Yes. The numbers game is reinforced at the university level by outcomes accreditation processes and quality standards measures. Okay, and everything is about points. Everything is about scores. Everything is about percents and ratios and all that stuff. The reason is that those bodies, those outcomes accreditation bodies, haven't had real exposure to OBE, but people think that outcomes accreditation is OBE. It's not. They'll learn only if we share our own experiences with them. I am going to pass up this example, but let's look at the thing in blue right here in the middle. You can't assess what you haven't defined. Okay, what is it that you want to assess? So here we are with part 3. Here are clear explanations, okay, of authentic outcomes and assessments. In 1986, okay, we finally defined outcomes, culminating demonstrations. Okay, I've already basically said what these slides show. Culminating means at or after the end, and demonstrations means you have to do something active. Culminating basically meant to us, how good can it get by the end? It did not mean cumulative. There was nothing to average. It wasn't about points. Demonstrations meant tangible actions, not just mental processing. Okay, the word authentic for researchers, okay, and I'm making a point here, is true. Something is true to what has been defined. So you have to define something. It means face validity. Okay, if this says jump, well, then the words mean jump, and so you better jump. Okay, it's not like you make up something else. Okay, what it says is what you get. Okay, that's what authentic means, and that's what validity, face validity means. It means that things have to be fully aligned and matched. So, authentic outcomes happen. They're demonstrations. They happen at or after the end because they're culminating. They are words, not numbers. They can't be averaged because they're words. You can't average words. They matter and have impact. And here I need to say, outcomes, I want to reinforce this, outcomes are the big abilities, the big things you want the students to be able to do when they walk out the door, not the small little stuff that can be the support for outcomes. Okay, it's not that it's unimportant, but those are just the objectives. Outcomes need to last beyond graduation, or why have we bothered with them? Okay, if they don't get out the door, and if they don't make people's lives and careers better, why do we have outcomes? Whoops, sorry. And they take different forms. They take different forms. So, quickly, authentic outcomes, 3-dimensional. Cognition is what happens in your head. We have to have it. We have to have it. It is the grounding, okay, the grounding dimension. Competence, 2-dimensional. It's what you can actually do. Can you tangibly do something? And context is where you do the doing. And contexts themselves. So this led to a new law of OBE here. Contexts, okay, can be complex. Therefore, unless your competence, okay, lets you perform well in the complex context, it isn't competence yet. So our law was context drives competence, drives cognition, so that we learn the things necessary for the context. Okay, that means practical application. OBE's law of alignment is about the words. The outcomes are expressed in words. The curriculum must contain the words and reinforce the words. The instructors must teach those words. Okay? Students must perform those words. The context must reflect those words. Here we go. The assessments must embody those words, and credentials must reflect those words. That's if you're going to be aligned, if you're going to operate according to the way OBE, the early pioneers, okay? All those Bloom mastery people, it's like, does this align? Does this align? Does this align? If it's aligned, the students are going to have a much better chance of succeeding. More deep implications follow. Okay, very quickly, doing and demonstrations are defined not just by words, but they're driven by action verbs. The verb could be describe, explain, it could be design, it could be develop, it could be run. Okay, whatever that action verb is going to be the nature of the process that gets demonstrated. Okay, mental processing verbs must be translated into demonstrable forms. When we started, the only two verbs that anybody was doing is saying, well, students need to know this and students need to understand this. And we said, well, how do you know they know? And how do you know they understand? What do they have to do to show you that they know or they understand? That's where the two verbs describe and explain came in. Okay, that was the simplest way to translate know and understand into demonstrable form. When you change the verb, you're changing the outcome and you're changing the assessment. Every time you change the word, they have to do different things with the same content or concepts. Okay? Describing it is different than explaining it, is different from analyzing it, is different from developing something or designing something. I mean, every time you change the verb, you're changing the outcome. So you've got to be extremely precise about what you're really seeking. Authentic assessments, that is, true aligned assessments, are verb driven. Now, I'm going to bypass the questions. Our initial framework of forms basically said and showed us, oh my goodness, down here at the bottom of this, what's going to be a hierarchy or it's going to be a mountain, are the things we do in classrooms. They're discrete skills and they're structured tasks. And structured means assignments. We give them the task to do, and their job is to do the task. So we structure the task. But in the middle range of the forms are getting much bigger, they're getting more complex, are these things we call higher order competences and complex unstructured tasks, where the students or us as people, okay, we create the structure, we create the task. Nobody tells us what to do. We do it and we integrate. It's complex. All those skills and other things that we've been developing so we can do it. But here's the final point. It translates into roles. And roles are the things we carry out in our lives. Okay? It's not just classroom stuff. It's all about learning and functioning in the real world. And I've given the names complex functional roles and life roles to that. Now, this role performance framework transformed OBE. And I'm not showing some of the other ones we developed. This was incredible, and this leads us right to the heart of the assessment and credentialing issues. Okay. 1991, a school district in the United States I was working with came up with a framework that nobody had ever seen before. Okay. I helped them do it, but it's like, I've never seen anything like this. All of a sudden, outcomes became about human beings. They weren't about just curriculum. They weren't just about skills and that sort of thing. It's like, oh, the real outcome is for people to be self-directed learners who will do the things that self-directed learners need to do. Now, that is in our next slide. Collaborative workers, people who can work in teams and work collaboratively with other people and get things more accomplished, better accomplished than they can do just by themselves. Complex thinkers who, community contributors who, and quality producers. Now, please understand, this is a new template, a new kind of framework. I'm not saying, and now everybody should do these 5 things. I'm saying this is a new way of framing outcomes. Suddenly, we were framing outcomes with, over there in the purple words, with qualitative attributes. That is, what kind of quality will the person bring to the role performance or the performance role that they will carry out? Now, we learn to do this in much more sophisticated ways, but this was the first basic one, and this changed everything. Within 3 weeks, I had school districts all across the United States wanting to do something like this. They said, this is our real purpose. It's not just teaching curriculum subjects. This is the real stuff. Absolutely true. This is when OBE really became criterion defined. That is substantive, because the question we asked after the who, how would you know a self-directed learner if you saw one? What does a self-directed learner do? Or a quality producer, or a complex thinker? What do they do? Well, the answer is A, here the attribute. The attribute is, let's say, self-directed, and the role performer is labeled. Well, a self-directed learner does this and does this and does this and does this because that's the actual demonstration of this performance role. These, in effect, are the outcome competence demonstration statements. They do this and they do this and they do this and they do this. That is what you have to decide. What a quality producer is going to mean to you, what an anything, you define it. Okay, it doesn't have to be those 5 particular things at all. Okay, this is about a template. It's about the human beings we're sending out the door. This is a very exacting process. It takes a lot of thinking and skill to do it well. But these statements here are what we called the essential performance components, the EPCs, okay? The essential performance components that really define the outcome. That's what I'd like you to focus on. That's how you can assess students. That's how you can teach students. That's how you can build learning experiences for students. Have them do these kinds of things so they can be the kind of quality role performer you're seeking. Now, that framework revolutionized OBE because it was about human beings and functioning in life, not just content and skills. Okay? Those roles apply to learners of all ages. The day that that framework came together, we recognized that kindergarten students, 5 years old, could do those things the way 5-year-olds do them. They could be self-directed learners. They could be collaborative workers. They could be complex thinkers in the way they think, okay? They could be community contributors and they could be quality producers in a 5-year-old way. That framework, that template goes all the way from kindergarten to graduate school. It's a universal thing, and it's about relevant performance roles of people in life. Therefore, continuity, being able to do these things over and over and over and over again in more mature ways, and personal qualities matter in how you define your outcomes. Okay? So, essential performance components now defined learning and assessments. Okay? It's like they were substantive, they were criterion defined, and that was our standard. Okay? Regardless of grade level, regardless of curriculum, was it helping develop and develop and develop those components over time? I want to bring this to closure. I'm sorry, I'm going to skip the questions. So here's some clear advice. Here's some clear advice about doing these things in a substantive, authentic way. Assessment, standards, and record-keeping systems in the world. Deep philosophical debates over, to look at this, education's traditional emphasis on selecting, labeling, and rewarding the fastest, best prepared academic learners. That's the bias. That's the cultural norm. Of course, this is what universities and colleges and graduate programs should be doing. Finding the best students and training them. Yes, they should find good students and train them, but there's got to be more. OBE lies on the criterion-defined side of those standards rather than the comparative competitive side. Okay? Now, authentic assessment, here we go, fundamentally means, it doesn't mean scoring, it doesn't mean points, it doesn't mean tests. It means gather evidence that is carefully aligned with and directly reflects a defined performance criterion. In other words, gather evidence that tells you whether or not the student is doing, let's call it, one of those essential performance components that we just looked at. Number two, you compare the substance and adequacy of the evidence. Here's the evidence against the defined criteria. Now, what comes third? Use that evidence and that gap, perhaps, between them to address any differences, to close the gaps, to improve the performance so that the performance matches, okay, the original intended outcome. So, authentic assessment is inherently formative, okay? Authentic assessment does what formative assessments do. So I've given you this grade 12 example, okay? 16 criteria. They were all going to get 6 points, right? In other words, we're still in the numbers game. And it's like, no, a criterion defined performance means you're either doing it the way the criteria has defined it or you're not. And if you're not, let's help you improve it. So that's what this last few minutes is going to focus on. You need to have criterion defined outcomes if you're going to proceed authentically. You need to proceed with a formative mindset. This is about improvement. Okay? You need to specify what's essential. What is essential? Okay? We haven't got time for all the frills. Get down to the core of what's essential and to these things I call the performance facts. And I'll tell you about them in a second. You need to develop criterion defined, here we go, standards and a record keeping system that shows you how they're doing on the things you've said are essential. And use a criterion defined performance rubric that documents improvement. And I'm going to show you how to do that really fast. Now, real world examples do this. And Sarwar, you made a comment earlier about, this is also different than everything else. Well, look at this. Okay, scouting merit badges, karate instruction belts, scuba instruction, okay, flight schools, pilot training and qualifications, military training and qualifications, and parenting are all criterion defined assessments and training programs. They aren't time-based. Okay? You don't get a brown belt or a black belt until you get a brown belt or a black belt. Okay? They don't give C- belts. Okay? They only have one kind. Can you do these things? Scuba instruction won't let you do certain kinds of things because you'll die. The same is true of flight schools. The same is true of military training. Okay? Criterion defined because until you can do it, you're not ready for the next step. So, what are these things called the facts? Well, I made this all up, except I didn't. Okay? They are 5 words, one of which starts with F, one of which starts with A, one of which with C, T, and S, okay, as my criteria words. And I was thinking, so you can see it can be any other words that really work for you, all right? But I was thinking of a musical performance because I'm a musician, okay? Well, you want that performance, that demonstration to be fluent. You want it to be accurate. You want it to be challenging, okay? You want the performance to be thorough. That is, the details, etc., are in there. And you want it to have style and something that really kind of captures you. Now, there are other F words and there are a number of these. If you don't like style, you still have FACT, which is very nice. And if you don't like fluency, you still have ACT, which is awfully nice. Okay, but the point is, these are the criteria we're going to put into a performance rubric. And the performance rubric, okay, the words I've got here, okay, we're going to put our fluency, accuracy, etc. words across in the columns. And we're going to have levels of, we're going to have to write words and statements that define what a professional level fluency would be like, what a competent fluency would be like, What an incomplete demonstration of fluency, etc. So we're going to have to write words that define the differences between these things. Now, if we did the standard way everybody learned to do rubrics, which was, well, we'll give 1 point to each of the 5 things in the bottom row, and we'll give 2 points to the things above, and we'll give 3 points to above there, and we'll give 4 points to above there, then the scoring range for, if you were going to score the rubric, the scoring range is going to be 5. That is, you get it 1 point for each of the 5 things, all the way up to 20. So the range is from 5 to 20 is the scoring range. Now, this is critical. If we do what people conventionally do and basically say, well, if they get to the competent level, they pass. Okay, it doesn't have to be professional level. But I'm applying this now to universities also, okay? If it gets to the competent level, they pass. Professional level, well, we really want that. So you have to make those decisions. But here's the point. Here's the point, because this matrix allows us to do all those things. So I'm going to flip back and forth. Don't score the rubric. That's not the purpose of it. Use your criteria instead. Okay? There are, okay, the range is 5 to 20. There are 5 ways to get 19. Okay? Now, 19 would give you a very high grade if we were going to score the rubric. I mean, you got 19 out of 20. That's wonderful. But here's the problem. One more step and we're into trouble. There are 15 different ways to get a score of 18 on this rubric. And an 18 would give you a high grade. Okay, 18 out of 20, wow, that's still a high grade. But 5 of those those 15 ways, a third of them reflect an inadequate facts criterion learning level. What do I mean by that? Okay, it means that in 5 cases, now this would be unusual maybe, but in 5 cases, you could have 4 things up there in the top row, okay? And you could have, I mean, you could have any one of the 5, but 4 things there, and you could have something that is an incomplete demonstration down below and still get 18 points. So you have not met the competent level on one of those. Therefore, the bottom line, like everything here, focus on the specific content. What's the thing that's going to bring that incomplete one up to competent? What's going to help the competence become more professional? So you have here an improvement matrix. And all you'd have to do is any number of things, but color in first assessment, this is how they did. So how they did on the first one, we're going to color green. And then on the second assessment, they're going to, okay, we'll color it blue because they're improving in this and this and this. And the next one we'll color it orange, etc. And we'll finally fill it. I mean, the point is you can be showing progress as it goes throughout here and never score and get into the numbers game about this kind of substance. So don't score the rubric, etc., etc. Use assessments formatively.
Prof, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the 2-hour limit of webinar is over. I think at any time it may get closed. So
I have finished.
Okay, good.
This is the point I wanted to reach, for people to see this is practical and doable It's just a matter of shifting perspective. So, Sarwar, thank you. It's been wonderful to be with you again.
Thank you, thank you. And every time I hear you, it kind of creates a resonance in me actually, and very enlightening, very enlightening. And I'm really kind of it's questionable that whether any audience are able to log in into the vertex, because no questions are here. Not sure what is happening.
Yeah, I don't, I just can't, I mean, all of that is beyond me. I'm glad they have recorded this.
Yes, yes.
And I hope that people will watch the recording.
Yeah. But the one final comment is that oh, something came into my mind. I want to share that God forgives, but GPS don't. I like that very much. And I'll mention it many times in future for sure, and mentioning you as well.
You know,
And
that came to me in the Philippines, and I used that in a presentation there, a national conference with the Minister of Education sitting there.
okay. Okay. And listen, as I was listening to you, another conflict came into my mind, that you told that if you don't mistake, you get the highest GPA. And we all know that if you don't mistake, you don't learn. We know
That's
that.
for sure.
Yes, these
That's
are
for
two
sure.
This is so fantastic, and each bit of it. But I am really concerned that it's in a matter of how quickly. I will not say it, but we are all getting educated by our traditional teachers. So basically, the whole bit, the huge level of revolution, when it is going to come, is very really questionable. But
And
I
that,
think it will
well,
happen.
and so the question you should be asking is, who in my country, who among us, okay, what team, what collective of people is going to drive this revolution forward?
Yeah.
Because if people don't do that, okay, the inertia will just continue to persist and persist, and nothing will change.
Yes, yes, yes. It needs a revolution. It's not just it cannot be done gradually, actually. I believe now. So thank you, Prof, and thank you that you are already very tired by delivering one workshop, and again you did the second one. And thank you for being again so nice with your fantastic presentation. Actually, very simple presentation, but everything in very deep words within there. So thank you, Professor Bill Spady, and thank you, audiences, if there are any audiences. But I believe it will be available in a recorded format in Vertex, and we'll be able to hear these speeches once again.
Okay.
So thank you. I think we should conclude this session at this moment.
Okay. Thank you very much.